at the School of Computer Science. And what makes her really a very good speaker for this session, she has not only ample experience in academia around the world, she's also currently a member of the European Union high-level expert group on artificial intelligence. And everybody who works in the field of artificial intelligence has at least heard about this expert group. And I'm also very curious to hear from you, Karen, more about their current outcomes and results of the first round of meetings. She's also a member and rapporteur for the Council of Europe as expert committee on human rights dimensions and automated data processing. And in our pre-talks prior to this event, I was asking Karen as well as Tobias what their particular concerns and issues are with artificial, the human, and human rights. And Karen shared with us what I would call a statement that artificial, and particularly the artificial intelligence apps, the applications, they can threaten our individual freedoms. They are not, the technology as such might not be the big threat, but the applications and how we use them also in our daily life. And so is it actually, and that's what I want to ask Karen to start her statement with, so it's actually the technology that threatens our being humans and human rights, or are we the sort of the creators of these artificial intelligence, and can we actually as human beings, as programmers, change the face of artificial intelligence? But I'll hear from you.
Thank you, Anya. Good afternoon. It's a pleasure to be here. So I think the emphasis that I made in my first sentence in response to your question was trying to distinguish between the techniques and the technology itself, which for the purposes of our discussion, I'm going to understand as machine learning technologies, from the way, so machine learning technologies provide us with a potentially quite powerful tool, but in and of themselves, they help us to produce a particular form of knowledge. And generally speaking, we think knowledge is a good thing. The question then becomes, what do we use our knowledge in aid of? And so it's the applications of this technology that are potentially problematic, depending very much on the application context, the intention, and its wider effects. So that's why I try to emphasize the importance of focusing on the applications, because it's us as humans and organizations who decide how we're going to use these technologies and to what ends we use them and how do we configure them and implement them in real world settings. And that's the particular focus of the kind of research that I do and the kinds of questions that I seek to interrogate in my work. So it's in that context that I think there are some very, very serious threats that existing applications already pose to our human rights and to our democratic freedoms.
Thank you very much. We'll certainly tap on this, but first we go to Tobias Rees, our speaker here, joining us again from Berkeley. The Reid Hoffman Professor of Humanities at Parsons, as I mentioned, at the New School in New York, but Tobias is also the founding director of the Transformations and Human Program at the Berggruen Institute in Los Angeles. Tobias, from what I learned about you, you work in these contemporary philosophical questions in art and technologies, and you're trying to combine these various elements. And you shared with us prior to this meeting the tapping on this kind of the old notion that human rights actually, you say, do human, they kind of make us human, whatever that means. And now the question is artificial intelligence actually helping us to be more humans and to maybe even enhance human rights, for instance, particular freedom rights, or are there actually a threat to it?
Or neither nor. as you pointed out, I'm director of the Transformations of the Human program, and it's a philosophical program that places philosophers and artists in technology labs where they work alongside engineers, and they are focused on the question: what is the effect of AI, for example, on our established concepts of what it is to be human? So we do not take the human for granted. We take the human as a concept. We are studying how humans are conceptualized, what the notion or understanding of the human is, um, and whether the way in which we have understood this term thus far is actually changed, challenged, undermined, for the better or for the worse, by contemporary technology. So when we say, how does something do human, then we mean what implicit conception of the human is built into something. Say a building, right? A building is full of norms of what the human is, how tall they are, how much heat they want, where the windows are placed, even though one does not usually think about that. So one can do that also with AI. Of course, one can do it with AI, and one can do it with human rights. And then they're kind of, I'm torn right now because I see two like big topics that I would like to discuss and address when it comes to human rights and AI. One topic simply notices that, or one path of the conversation simply notices that the rights of man, as it was originally called, were invented after the Second World War. There was you can ask, what was the human that was at stake at the time? And clearly, it was a member of a nation, ideally a citizen, and you could ask, what was the major threat to the human? And you get as answer probably totalitarian states. And then you get the rights of man framework, which is largely designed as political rights and as social rights vis-a-vis a government and a state that has to provide certain services. And then once you have that in mind, you fast forward to AI, and you recognize that the questions that emerge from AI are very different. The concept of the human, what the kind of human that is at stake is an individual. It's basically an aggregation of data points, if you will. National contexts or something like that do not matter in the first moment, at least in the broader context of the US debate. And what's the threat to the human? Well, that's bias and surveillance, that's oppression, that's a reinscription and an exacerbation of existing, especially racial biases. So where does this threat emanate? Companies. So, I have two quite different situations. Both have to do with the human and with threats to the human, but they're different things. But I can also go down another rabbit hole, which is there is a poetry to AI, where AI is something in itself, where a machine does something that humans cannot do in ways that are not comprehensible to human. And many philosophers and artists like the way that machine learning, let's say, undermines the human. And then there's a politics of AI where this poetics plays no more role, because then AI is just a human tool. It's made by humans. Humans determine. There's a tension there that I find fascinating. So two directions.
You mentioned one thing, Tobias, and I want to start with that one and then go over to Karen again. What is it to be human? And implicitly you said, well, it has to do also, of course, with what we might call civilization, a certain way of behavior that we have that hopefully is also be objective, it's neutral, that's what we call civilized, treating each other with respect and of course, without prejudice and without discrimination, etc., to make it more concrete. So now I'm wondering whether artificial intelligence, certain algorithms, technology, apps, applications, as Karen might say, will actually help us to be more civilized. I want to get away from this typical notion of, the artificial intelligence can, of course, be misused, it can be abused, there can be bad applications. We know that already. But anyway, to look a little bit from the other side, how can it actually enhance us being more human. And then after that, I would like to go further to Karen and ask her, okay, when this civilized human notion that we like to be proud of as human beings too, has to do a lot with mutual trust. And I looked at the high panel, the expert group of the EU on the ethics and artificial intelligence, and there was very much about developing trustworthy sort of algorithm or to have more trust in artificial intelligence. So at the first, Tobias, how do we connect these issues of civilized mutual respect and being human and using artificial intelligence?
So I'm unmuted. Okay. I feel provoked by the question for different reasons, but in a positive way. Don't get me wrong. Partly because, well, the civilized always need something that is not civilized, which is interesting, right? You need to get away from something, or the more human that needs something that is less human, I would prefer to so basically we would then get more of the same. So, more of the behavior that we currently understand as the right behavior for humans, right? But there are other ways of asking this question, and that is, does AI allow us to be human differently? Is it basic, or to stay in your genre, does it allow us to be civilized differently, so to speak, right? So the term civilization is one thing, the discourse of the civil, which is related to civil society, which is related to a national context normally. The rise of the bourgeois, that's the civil in there, right? Is one thing. But you could say that AI, more than any other technology before, has allowed for a new kind of civilization, if you will. So make a distinction between national societies that have been designed around newspapers, around radio, around national TV stations. And then you have AI-powered networks that run diagonal to nation states, that connect people in different contexts, that create political realities and actors that cannot be regulated or subsumed by the classical institutions that regulate civil society because they're all related to a national context. You could say that a classical national society is organized like a pyramid with few at the top and many at the bottom. They hold together a wild diversity of people because they have a kind of mass communication system that provides a shared reality framework. So people disagree about everything, but the things that they disagree about, they share. And now you have networks that run diagonal to these societies. Networks are not at all like pyramids with few at the top and many at the bottom. They tend to be very flat. People with similar inclinations join. And they are no longer held together by a shared reality framework because they have their own sort of news circulation systems. So on the one hand, I think that's incredibly exciting. I think that's wonderful because it allows for communities and for political action that is independent of territory, that appears to be largely independent of national context, of ethnicity, of linguistics, of race. On the other hand, it's of course disastrous. It's almost, it's terrifying because it undermines the few political institutions and shared sense of reality that we have relied on for 250 years or since the French Revolution. And so that's where the question of regulation comes in for me. How can we stabilize the positive effects and mitigate the negative effects? And we cannot do it with the old institutions. I'm convinced of that because then we lose everything that's valuable too.
So the institutions as we know them that sort of regulate and organize our societies, they erode in a way, or artificial intelligence might become a competitor to these institutions. So how do we make them trustworthy? To take the keywords of the expert group and asking Karen, what is your take on that? You have to unmute
Sorry,
yourself.
I've unmuted myself. Tobias, if I may say, so you have a beautiful way of explaining things very clearly. I'm really enjoying this. I just want to emphasize that the way in which Tobias has presented it is actually he's demonstrating that our concern is with digital transformation. So not just AI. When we think about at least for me, when I'm thinking about the larger implications, one of the things that this is fundamentally reliant upon is the global internet as a connected data infrastructure across the world. So if I just have a machine learning tool on my computer with a data set on my computer and it's unconnected to anything, it's not terribly powerful. But it's our capacity to connect over the internet instantaneously in real time at scale. I think that is incredibly powerful and novel. And it does have this enormous potential for new connections and new communities that we wouldn't have otherwise had. And that helps to explain why there was so much excitement when the internet first emerged onto the scene. One of the tragic things, of course, and I guess history teaches us this, even though I'm no historian, is that power begets power. And so all of the hope we had for the democratization of community was in fact taken over by the kind of power dynamics that we've seen everywhere since time immemorial, that those with power will seek to gain and acquire power and to re-establish and to expand on that power. So the democratizing potential, I think, of our networked infrastructure has yet to be fully realized. And I think that is one of the foundational challenges really for the notion of trustworthy digital societies. And I suppose one of the reasons why that has become a focus for, at least, or why it was a focus for the work of the high-level expert group was, I guess, at least three features of these technologies. Firstly, they are driven by software and data, which we can't see, right? So all of this processing is happening inside some powerful machines, and or the average person doesn't understand what's going on, can't see what's going on. The computer pops out an output, and that may well activate something in the real world. But how can we trust, for example, if it was a medical diagnosis, that if it generates a recommendation to my doctor or physician that should be the particular kind of treatment that should be applied to me? How do I know that that was not just a random number generator that suggested I should have, 3 dozen pills of this and that and the other? Unless I could have blind faith, but frankly, that would be a little bit stupid, okay? I need to have reasons to trust in the basis of that decision. And because we have this opacity and we have this complexity, and in relation to machine learning applications, we have a very big unpredictability element. And because of the way in which the techniques operate, which is to find correlations or patterns in large data sets, there's quite a significant prospect that those correlations may be simply lucky, not actually reflecting the truth of the underlying social world or reality or medical condition that I have. So if the output is produced based on those patterns, it may in fact be wholly unreliable and not produce what it's intended to produce, or at least what, as a patient, I'm imagining that it's going to produce. And that's why the notion of trustworthiness becomes really important, because if we start to make decisions and make lives about ourselves and our societies based on the outputs generated by machine learning, then we need to have institutions in place that will enable us to have trust in those outputs, in the same way that we have developed, for example, quite sophisticated institutions that allow us to walk onto an airplane, even though we don't know what's gone on under the bonnet. We don't know whether it's been reliably checked and all the safety checks have been properly done and so on and so forth. And yet we do this, or at least we used to before COVID, without really thinking about it. So I guess that's part of the challenge for where we are with machine learning applications, is to establish an institutional structure and a methodology and a set of best practices through which we can start to establish that kind of trustworthiness. And that was the idea that was driving the kind of foundational basis upon which the high-level expert group was trying to proceed.
How do we have to imagine that? Because when we build trust in institutions or even among people, it's very much about being transparent. We call it maybe honesty, to come back to the human notion, and also a certain level of accountability. Is that something where we can, that avenue, can we go down that avenue and say, look, IT companies, software companies have to be more transparent? I know their organization will call for algorithm watch, for instance, to making algorithms transparent. Not that we understand all the details, as you were illustrating with the airplane. We don't really know how it works, but we do, if we want to, we can see the technology there. So I'm just wondering how to build this trust. I leave it there, but Tobias, you want to go directly into that.
Yeah, I'm very curious about that. So we did an analysis of the available AI principles. You know, there are multiple web pages that compile them all. And there is something that I find fascinating, and I was going to say to some degree dishonest, but let's call it a harmony of illusion, because I don't want to think that anyone wants to be dishonest. That's and that is, so we want to build explainable AI. I think originally that was actually a research project. Historically speaking, it was the recognition that what happens in a deep neural network with, let's say, 1,000 hidden layers is completely beyond human logical comprehension. We just don't know how the machines arrive at the output that they have. Now, over time, that became a big question. How can you rely on things that you cannot explain or understand? Actually, in the AI community, that led to a conflict between people who do good old-fashioned AI, which is perfectly explainable at every step, and people who do machine learning. And machine learning is not perfectly explainable at every step. So that led to a conflict, but no machine learning. Strictly speaking, all of the current technology falls apart. So, but if you take that term serious, that we only build AI that's comprehensible to humans, that's reducible to humans, that has humans as controlling instances in the loop, then that's a harmony of illusion, because what makes machine learning interesting, relevant, and valuable, I guess, to most of the people who use it, is that it can do things humans cannot do, and not only because we have physiological limits or something like this, but no, it's a completely different non-human logic. So whether this is move 37 in the AlphaGo game, where the AlphaGo machine suddenly does a move that is, in 2,500 years of human history of playing Go, no human seems to have conceived of. It's like it suddenly adds a perspective that was not there before, whether that's AlphaFold 2 about how proteins are folded, or whether that is the Google search algorithm, which most definitely is too big for any one human or group of humans to understand or control, or the same for Facebook. Whether this is in Germany, the industrial Internet of Things built by Siemens and so on. So clearly we build AI in order to have some non-human agency there. And so if we want to build AI that's reducible to humans, well, then we can just as well stop. Clearly that cannot be. So that there is a curious tension there. And the question, how do you build trust in something that is non-human and logically organized in a way that is different from human, is for me a completely fascinating challenge. I love that tension and think it's perfectly addressable, but it's not the way I just describe it is not that the discussion is currently led.
I have already questions from our audience I would like to pose to you, and they both are connecting very well. Patrick is asking, how is the unpredictability, or you can say the predictability of IA different from that of a person? So basically, is artificial intelligence a better human being here or not? And in that line goes the question of Sarat Gandhi, who say, look, if the artificial intelligence learns everything from human behavior, how can it be sort of more ethical or non-biased if what artificial intelligence does is copying sort of human behavior, being biased? don't we have too high of expectations on artificial intelligence? Karen?
Okay, so let me address the unpredictability question first. And Tobias's explanation of the difference in the reasoning processes is basically the foundation of the explanation. So human cognition and thinking works in a way that we are accustomed to, that we're, I suppose, hardwired to reason. And it's not the same way that machine learning techniques reason. And in particular, if you have learned machine learning technologies that respond iteratively to their context. And if the contexts are unpredictable, that means that machine behavior will, of course, be unpredictable as it responds to the context. And that's really the kind of source of unpredictability, because you can't predict the context. The context is dynamic and changing, and the future is unknown. Then we simply cannot predict ahead of time, simply because we can't predict the future, even though the machines are making it more possible to accurately predict the future. We can't actually predict with 100% accurate all the time what the future will bring. And if the machines are interacting with that context as it emerges, then the outputs will also be unpredictable. So the combination of the inductive process upon which the techniques use, combined with the integration in the context, means that there'll be an element of unpredictability that is cannot be eliminated from the way in which they operate. You can build constraints in, but there will still be unpredictability. I hope that answers that question.
Tobias, do you want to go to the second question? Go ahead, please.
So predictability is such a fascinating thing. I once talked to the man who invented Hadoop. That was the software that was originally making big data possible. Like he called it Hadoop because his son had a soft toy called Hadoop, a teddy bear basically. And he told me that the different things that Hadoop was used for, from weather prediction to mate matching in humans. And he told me with fascination that his dad actually found his new partner through using Hadoop-based software. And I said, isn't it scary that humans are predictable to such a degree? And he looked at me and very clearly had never thought about that question. It was really fascinating for me that it's this, the averageness of the human that gets constantly aggregated. So it turns out that humans are about 85% or so predictable. If you have large enough data sets, that's pretty scary. And that made me decide I have to defend this 15%. I have to really, really, really defend this 15%. And unless you make that an explicit task in your life, you become reducible to 85%. And that's really scary and bad. And so I think AI can handle uncertainty quite well. What I love about the work of Stuart Russell here in Berkeley at the Center of Human Compatible AI is that he says, let's not build AI that has confidence over these remaining 15%. If it actually gets to the remaining 15% or encounters uncertainty that is above a certain threshold, it should stop and say, dear human, what would you like me to do? And I think that that's very important, because otherwise we build a kind of, Max Weber called it iron cage. Let's call it digital cage for a second. We build a digital cage where we are constantly reducible to 85%, because that's what, machine learning are prediction machines. So that's what they will reduce us to. They will constantly reduce us to the knowable. And if you ever receive, like, I love when Amazon sends me recommendation emails with my own books, like, excuse me, can you do any better? So you recognize how silly that can be and how important these 15% are.
That's so true. I want to follow up again on Sarat Gandhi's question that's still in the open about actually asking, why do we expect from artificial intelligence or machines technology more than actually from human beings? We expect from them to be non-biased and perfectly ethical. And basically, what you were saying is that is, of course, almost not possible. But she's asking, why do we still expect that? In a way, they solve all our problems. They close the gap of the 15% of unpredictability. Why do we keep believing that?
Let me jump in there. I find that interesting that there's an assumption that we do expect more from the machines than we do humans. I'm not sure that we do, actually. I think this is a live debate. So, for example, in relation to autonomous vehicles, the debate is, and in fact, I hear this very, very often, and I think it's a fallacy, that we don't need to prove. I hear this from people who are very keen to build a new application, to do something they think is novel and exciting, even though I might think it's certainly contestable and is worthy of kicking the tires on a little further. I don't need to prove that it's, highly reliable. I just need to prove that the outputs are better than those generated by humans. So there is a very strong line of argument in the developer world. We don't need to prove that they're much better. We just need to prove that they're incrementally better and that's enough. And some people say we just need to show that autonomous cars are a bit safer than human drivers, and that's enough. And so that I think is still an open debate. I don't think that's resolved. In terms of my personal view, and I think this argument is useful to think about in relation to autonomous weapons. And the question here is, should we have the same kind of threshold levels of responsibility and certainty and accuracy and so on and so forth for a robot soldier and a human soldier? It's a nice question. Should we just operate on the same thresholds? And one of the things I like to believe, and Tobias might say, oh, Karen, you have such an old-fashioned view of humanity, is that if I come face to face with someone who's pointing a gun at me and threatening to shoot, then I hope that they will have to think twice before they do, knowing that he or she will forever live with my death on their conscience. I'd like to believe that. Now, I'd like to think that if this person pulls the trigger, they will have trouble sleeping at night if I am perfectly innocent. Now, I could be completely deluded and hopelessly naive. I'm happy to accept that. But trust me, a machine will have no trouble sleeping at night because it does not need to sleep at night. And I think that's a very good reason to expect different thresholds. But people can disagree with me on that, and I'd be very interested to hear what Tobias thinks about this.
Tobias, you want to respond directly?
Indirectly.
Okay.
I do think that in some areas we expect machines to do better than humans. Just mentioned protein folding. That may seem like a really sort of obscure field of science somewhere, but if you for all kinds of diseases and for all kinds of problems, you need to know the shape of proteins, how they look like, so that you can, for example, develop a drug or a vaccine like right now that can attach to the molecular structure of the protein. And so in terms of medical breakthroughs, the findings of AlphaFold 2, DeepMind, is just extraordinary and completely beyond human capabilities, right? So that's awesome. But the question was, I think, a little different, and was about why do we expect machines to be unbiased? Now, I think we sort of all know that in principle, there is nothing like unbiased. Everything is positioned, and hence everything is biased to a certain degree. But the big debate about bias, and I actually don't know how this debate plays out in Europe, but I know how it plays out in the United States. What you have in the United States is basically an exacerbation of bias due to machines. So when an algorithm sends police, into certain parts of town because there is historical data that says that in this part of town there are more problems, then we know that the data is biased. Basically, it's informed by the segregationist and racial history of the United States. Some neighborhoods get policed much more than others. Facial recognition, as has been shown multiple times by Timnit Gebru or Choi Bulambini, doesn't work as well on people of color. So the fails positive rate is extremely high. People get, incarcerated even though they have nothing. I mean, so this is a huge problem, and there, one hope is that maybe, I mean, one hope of AI engineers is that maybe there is a chance to build AI that is less biased, so to speak, that allows us to debias data sets and to allow us to be more objective. Now, the critics say, how would that be possible, given that you need data and given that the data is so screwed? And so there is a kind of, a complicated situation. Yes, and machines and automated weapons. Just again, Stuart Russell has made a little video of a true horror scenario where you're hunted by a set of drones and they're ruthless. Now, of course, humans are fairly ruthless too. But yes, you would want to find a way of building AI that has an appreciation of the other, qua other, basically. That would be very lovely.
And I want to connect back to that in the remaining minutes and how we started. It brings us nicely back to this sort of the civilization, to this human, and what role human rights can play in it. Now that we sort of renewally discovered again that machines are not the better human beings, that's basically the essence of also this discussion. But the question remains: can these machines, can apps, can algorithm sort of enhance, let's say, the enjoyment, particularly of civil rights, of individual rights, the freedom to information, the access to information, for instance. The freedom to assembly peacefully. When we talk about the Facebook revolution and the Arab Spring, that is often taken as an example, and so on. Can actually sort of machines, can apps, can social media, can the way they are programmed, enhance the usage of human rights, the application of human rights, and the adherence to human rights?
So let me pick up on that one. It's such a big question. So I guess your original question started off with how AI applications might be threatening human rights. And I suppose one of my initial responses, well, let's just remember it's a powerful tool, or at least on one way of thinking about it. And surely there must be possible applications that are human rights enhancing. And I like to think there are. And I think we're starting to see some of them, which I've heard of only very recently. So I hear that some charitable organizations and NGOs are starting now to apply machine learning techniques to corporate filing documents to try and look for suspicious behavior in corporate reporting. So they could possibly be used as tools for trying to secure more transparency and accountability in relation to the exercise of organizational power. So I think there is scope for that. One of the things that really troubles me, however, is that the real asymmetry and accountability that we see in relation to the availability of data in relation to the big tech organizations themselves, vis-a-vis what they have in relation to plebs like us. So they have massive amounts of data about our individual behaviors at a highly granular level. And Google is one of the most secret companies I know. You can get very, very little information, same with Facebook, about what actually goes on inside. And so the hope of actually securing meaningful accountability, we have so little data about what actually goes on inside that unless we can actually pry open those black boxes, I don't feel very optimistic about the prospects of securing meaningful accountability that is evidence-based without access to that data. So without more transparency on the inside of organizational power, where that is being deployed to build and implement these technologies in social contexts, I think we are stuck and I think we are stuffed. Unless we do something to seriously improve the transparency and accountability of that domain of extraordinary power. So I'm sorry to say something so pessimistic, but that's where I am on it.
All right. It's also, improving how these machines actually work, or how the institutions behind the machines work. But again, coming back, and I would like to use the last remaining 2 minutes also asking again, can it actually promote, enhance human rights for all human beings, including the right to education, again, the right to assemble, to express oneself, the right to exercise one's religion and belief, for instance. Tobias.
Yes, I mean, I want to frame this the other way and say, yes, absolutely, can all do all of this, but do you want that? I live in a country where one has to put that in context, where the right to use, to have access to information leads people to go into pizza stores and shoot people because they have read that Hillary Clinton has a child porn ring in the basement of that building. So, or, Twitter bans right-wing, Breitbart style disinformation, we call it, and Parler opens up and says, we're the Twitter for all those right-wing people who are banned from Twitter. So there, you could say, well, that's not information. So we sometimes at the Berkman Institute make a distinction between information and intensity. They don't circulate information, they circulate intensity, meaning emotional states, anger, fear, resentment, and so on. But how to establish truth as the baseline without establishing a worldview, I think that's incredibly important and incredibly difficult. And if we succeed in that, then I'm very optimistic that we can introduce a shared reality framework. And then I'm happy for people to disagree about things, very happy, because that's democracy. But we need that shared reality. We need an underlay that holds things together. And we currently do not have that. And we will not get that necessarily from AI.
So back to the to the big issue, artificial intelligence is sort of a tool and an equipment also to help, let's say, human beings and also to be human. But of course, it poses threats, and it very much comes down to how can we hold this. The institutions behind artificial intelligence also accountable, how to make it transparent, as Karen said. And then, yes, artificial intelligence can make us maybe more human and more civilized in many aspects, enjoying human rights. And with these last words also of yours, I would like to hand back actually to Rüdiger Lenz, who is listening to us, because the time is over. We already completed the session. Thank you very much, Tobias and Karen. I very much enjoyed also your insights and your views, and I'm sure there's a lot of inspiration for also our listeners and the participants.
Thank you for having me. Thank you.
Thank you. You're very welcome. Nice to meet you too.
And thank you so much from all of us, because I think finishing on such a positive note was very well accepted and very well heard from all of us. And Anja and Tobias and Karen, I think you shed some light on the topic which will certainly be debated in the future. And the relation to humanities and what it means for the future of mankind and societies is one of the questions I think we will debate the years to come. And we would certainly invite you again, because thank you. There were big questions and some very interesting answers. So now, with having said that, for you all watching us, there's 5 minutes break. Take your cookies, take your time, but be back at 3:50 sharp. Thank you so much. Bye-bye. And now we'll have a short presentation about the trustworthy human-AI interrelations, presented by Asun Sinclair, herself a philosopher and sociologist, currently a senior principal scientist for technology and research, and program director for digital assurance at the DNVGL Group. Maybe you're coming from Oslo, or is it Spain that very moment? Asun, very much welcome to you for joining this session. Where are you?
Thank you very much. I'm actually in Oslo, so I just have put the northern lights. Not that we see them in Oslo, a little bit to say that I'm up in the north.
It's beautiful. We can all see it. I think everybody wants now to go up north where everything seems so be in order. So great to have you. Please, let's start with your presentation first, and then we have a Q&A and discussion, and then we'll also include our audience. Asun, the floor is yours. Welcome.
Thank you very much, and let me know if you can see the correct presentation in the presentation mode. Can you see it well?
Yes, we can see it. Great.
Very well. Good. So I wanted to talk about the work that we have been doing on trustworthy industrial AI systems, but I will be sort of narrating a little bit the story from this, the topic of today, which is how we can have trustworthy human AI relations. And then we can unpack more as we enter into the discussion. First, our position so far is that we should treat the trustworthiness of AI systems perhaps not in a very different manner than the way in which we demand trustworthiness from a leader or from an expert or even from an organization to whom and to which we delegate our authority to make decisions, if those are technologies that are defined precisely by their capacity to make decisions. So that's a point of departure to sort of pitch on the idea. And the second key point of our position at the moment is that we believe that even with all the complications, AI systems should be subject to the same quality assurance methods and principles that we use for any other technology. What is important to understand when we talk about AI, and I'm sure this has been discussed during this week, is how we define it. We choose to follow the recommendations of the European Commission High-Level Panel on AI that says AI systems are systems that display intelligent behavior by analyzing their environment and taking actions with some degree of autonomy, and those actions will be different in different contexts. But the overarching role is to achieve a specific goal. And what we think is important, certainly from an industrial perspective, is to distinguish between two categories of AI systems. First of all, AI-enabled virtual digital assets, but also AI-enabled cyber-physical digital assets. So we can think about providing trust in relationship to a model, but perhaps most importantly, providing trust in relationship to, let's say, an autonomous or semi-autonomous vehicle. And these two categories of assets are important as we think on the conditions for trustworthiness. And we all know that there is a wide debate on AI ethics and on trust in AI. But how do we manage the risk introduced by AI in industrial contexts is a less mature debate. Another issue that we believe is important is distinguishing different types of AI. And I don't want to do a technical talk, but just simply to distinguish, and this is a way to cluster different technologies. On the one hand, we have the traditional software systems or knowledge base. And these are relatively simple, illustrated here by some coding done by some of my colleagues. And this is very different from, let's say, the experience base, which usually are often referred to as machine learning, where the algorithm learns something from the deployment that it does and changes behavior as it moves along. And very often, the knowledge base and the experience base together is what we see. So in the case of, for example, an autonomous vehicle, you will find both of them working at the same time and dependent on one another. So very often the mistakes and the trust are not only in relation to machine learning, but also on how the choices made by machine learning affect the knowledge-based coding that a system may have. And a third type, which is less used so far, but it is coming and it will come, is reinforcement learning. And these type of models are much more difficult to say something about their trustworthiness. So these three different types of AI are important to distinguish as we analyze a particular system. And I will say that the relations with people and the role of people are also going to be different. The key point that I want to make today is that when we talk about artificial intelligence, we think about machines and we forget about the humans, and this is a mistake. We often see autonomy as equal to lack of human intervention and interactions, and define it as self-directness and self-control. But in reality, autonomy is not really a discrete property of a system, nor even a particular technology in itself. Most of the time is an interdependence, and it's an interdependence between machines and humans. And I believe this is fundamental for this debate about trustworthiness between machines and AI. And the debate on safety of autonomous systems needs to be about how AI is a technology with agency, but at the same time is also an interdependent system. This is probably often forgotten in very technical debates about artificial intelligence and what we need to do in order to assure their safety and trustworthiness to deploy it in society. Trust and ethics are very related. And what is also important is to understand the multidimensional nature of trust. Different stakeholders and different people need different types of evidence in order to trust something. And there are huge differences in the paper. One of the issues we discuss is simply gender differences. There is empirical evidence that in many countries, men tend to trust AI and machines and autonomous cars a lot more than women. But also it's about providing different types of evidence that need to be both technical as well as non-technical. We also know that there is a sprawling AI ethics guidelines, and there is in fact a couple of articles that have come up recently that are collecting all the different types of AI guidelines, AI ethics guidelines, and the ISO committee, International Standards Organization, also has work of which I'm part, creating a technical paper on AI ethics in societies, and a huge debate about responsible AI. But I think it's very important to also understand that ethical issues, and here is where the role of people and the trustworthiness between people and machines need to come into play, are very often not necessarily related to technology, but to existing unethical context, to existing unethical rules of behavior, and existing oppression, of which the deployment of AI simply adds on another layer of automating that unfairness. And lastly, there is a major drive to regulate AI impacts on society, and at the European level, this is quite clear, but so far there is really not a clear set of governance mechanisms, neither public nor private, but we are likely to see this coming as the years come by quite quickly. Another issue that is important in here, again, the relationship between humans and AI is central, is that each sector and the deployment of AI in a particular sector will have its specificity. And very often what we need is to have a combination of knowledge, digital knowledge, knowledge on machine learning, on AI, but also domain knowledge in order to truly understand the scope of this application. So for example, in health, it's quite well known, there are many potential applications in prognosis, diagnostic, therapeutic clinical decision support, natural language processing in health informatics, and even administration tools, health outreach, information, and also triage. And that means that this sector has very specific challenges with unique risk profiles, with systematic data issues, a lot of challenges related to implementation, data access for development and testing, and also complex organizations' responsibilities and incentives, and I will say also a highly regulated field. So we put forward a way to think about these characteristics of trustworthy AI systems following that analogy that I presented at the beginning, saying, well, we will demand from these AI systems similar criteria that we do from a leader or from an organization to which we delegate authority. And we have these different types of characteristics. So on the one hand, we will ask the system to be legitimate. This will be related to data quality. It will be analyzing the suitability of the technology vis-a-vis the problem to be solved, questions related to performance, and the need to have risk management and safety plans in place. There will also be the sort of more core technical set of issues related to the ability to perform and the capacity to verify that that performance is fit for purpose. These are issues related to design quality, to data preparation and model training, and to testing and simulation, as well as explainability and also evidence, including identifying sources of evidence to verify that the system is fit for purpose. Human-machine interdependency is also an issue that needs to be looked upon. If an AI system is composed by different types of agents, and as I said, often is interrelation between humans and machines, we need to identify those agents in the system and also identify which roles each agent will have in the deployment in a particular case. Issues related to communication. Just think about the example of the 737 MAX, where one of the multiple problems, there were many problems, but one of the multiple problems was a miscommunication between the software system and the pilots. And one of the key issues that Boeing has now put into place has been the training and retraining of pilots, which was not done when the airplane, that model was first launched in the market. So that communication between humans and machines is extremely important, and also machine-to-machine interfaces, as often we have a constellation of different technologies working together. At a more non-technical level, we believe it's extremely important to demonstrate the motives and the purpose of deploying technologies that are by themselves risky and prone to misuse. Therefore, we think it's critical to disclose the goals, to disclose the benefits to stakeholders on taking the risk to deploy these AI systems, and also to understand not only the organizational maturity of those organizations taking part in that deployment, but also questions related to corporate accountability in case something goes wrong. And the last cluster of characteristics of trustworthy AI systems, we believe, is the transparency on the impact on the stakeholders. There is, I think, out there becoming now much more robust attempts to generate frameworks for impact assessment, a way to ascribe responsibility for those actions, very related to the human-machine interdependency and to the identification of the agents and the role, and also the need to provide continuous monitoring in systems that, by definition, are going to be changing over time. So this time and change perspective is of fundamental importance. In short, we think that assuring AI, providing trust on AI, needs to be about a broader view. It's about both product implementation and lifecycle processes. It's about the possibility to provide continuous assurance. It's attention to organizational issues and the regulatory environment on particular contexts and knowledge of that regulatory environment. It's about understanding the criticality of the deployment. And it's, of course, about societal and ethical issues. This, however, doesn't mean we need to be scared in analyzing these systems. In fact, my colleagues in the business area of digital solutions in DMBGL have already put in the market a recommended practice, which was the beginning of some of our technical work in the research department. So to summarize, we believe that we need to be looking at 4 interdependent and contained systems at the level of the model, the application, the wider ecosystem, and also society. So for example, at the level of the model, we will be looking at things such as fit for purpose, performance, robustness, bias, interpretability, data issue, and the features of the application. At the application level, we will be looking at questions related to legitimacy, agency and roles, human interfaces, the monitoring of the changes, modularization, security issues, and also the business case of which this deployment applies. And then we think we need to look wider into the ecosystem that this model and this particular application impacts upon, by having a clear understanding of who are all the stakeholders, mapping of agents, defining the roles, the interoperability, questions of standards. In many cases, we should also take into account questions related to sustainability and environmental impact in many critical issues, but also in many business contexts. If the operation of a particular AI application is important for a system to function, then we will need to have in place redundancy systems. We always should look into potential unintended use, and definitely the organizational maturity of those involved. And lastly, we should always look at the context of society in relation to law and regulations, ethical issues, fairness, systemic bias, job displacement, which is important not only at the societal level, but is also important in the context of a particular company that is using and deploying these systems, asking questions as to whether this is going to lead to job displacement, or whether what it really requires is a retraining for that trustworthy human-machine interface. Effects on users on a large scale, I think we have lots of unfortunate examples of this not being considered, and obviously the potential for misuse at a larger scale. So this was my presentation, and I look forward very much to engage in a conversation with you. Thank you.
And thank you for sharing such a broad view with us, because that gives us now the opportunity to sort of dig a little bit deeper to specifics. And I also would like to thank you, because I think you rightly so put the human factor in the right context in its relation to tech and the machines. And that relationship is exactly, I think, what is some people concerned about, and others are very much into the debate. Where will that lead us? Let me start with health and the health care. I think you rightly so mentioned that there is a very complex system, and we all sort of experienced throughout this year. And just to give you an example, in Germany, I think we felt that tech was one side, but how to bring it to the personalities, to the persons, and how to sort of use all the data necessary. And then we found out that we had some severe malfunctions, using data, not having enough data, or as you said, the complexity of the levels, federal government, state government, communalities, where there was also a lack of coordination. And I think that experience brings us to the question, what lessons should be learned from that? What practical things we can take away which would better use AI in the whole health management and health explanation system? Could you give us some hints?
Thank you very much for that question. I'm certainly not an expert on AI in the healthcare sector, but I have something to say in regards to that. I think my first point will be that very often in the drive that we have to automate, we forget that there are many things that cannot be automated. and human common sense cannot be substituted by an algorithm. And I think that very often we forget this sort of basic fundamental insight. On the other hand, I believe also that we tend to be over-optimistic as to what these automated systems can do and cannot do. And we rush into their implementation without analyzing properly whether we have the necessary data to allow us to see whether really the system will be fit for purpose. In many of the cases, we are in completely new territory. And I believe that one of the areas of research that are most important is to create simulations that can allow us to see how potential errors may come and to learn from those errors. So I think that the COVID-19 crisis has actually been a reason for sprawling and speeding up digitalization on all senses, sometimes for good, the possibility that we have to communicate, but sometimes not very well thought through. And I think that in our desire to put to use these tools, we have forgotten to do the basics. Do they violate our privacy? Do we have, again, the quality of data necessary to do that? So I think the lesson to me is that we need to slow down and do one step at a time rather than rushing into the deployment of these systems in things that are so critical. And again, never to substitute human common sense, and definitely never to substitute the importance of defining how to align goals. Like, for example, will be the case of problems related to different scales of government. We should not yet entrust these AI systems to hugely critical tasks until we have a lot more experience on what can go wrong and how can we prevent it.
Azun, thank you very much. You just said that we should do one step after the other, not rush it too much. But you know, and we know, all of us, that patience is not a political virtue, and the expectations of the public are very high as far as speedy forward going. And coming to the legitimacy, which also was one of the topics you were touching on, the legitimacy of AI is put by many in doubt because they are fearing it more than they are embracing it. They have anxieties about it, outbursts and outcome, and you just mentioned it as well. So as a sociologist, what advice could you give to overcome that lack of legitimacy, how to overcome it and how to work with the public and the public mind in education, in trying to get their anxiety level down and address it? What could be done, should be done?
Thank you very much for that question. I think it's fundamental. So one very important thing is that the first thing we need to do is to understand exactly what are those anxieties. So we need a lot more sociological research on what the public thinks about these technologies. At the same time, we also know, like in the case of many new technologies, there is a lot of misperception because not everything is as bad as it is perceived. Mm-hmm. On the other hand, there are huge scary risks and scary things out there in the media. And the media is portraying the scary part rather than the good part. So I think what we have is to bridge the gap of an over-optimistic, very fast deployment of these technologies in society and in issues that are important for society. And at the same time, we need to educate people as to exactly what the problems are, because not everything is about the average citizen, I will say, even in Europe, really doesn't distinguish between the concept of super intelligence versus artificial intelligence as being just a machine learning usual application that is a matter of simple, very fast calculations, and that we use them all the time in many different cases. So we need both education about those misperceptions, education about what are the technical capabilities today versus the big problematic applications, while at the same time also educating the public that the step to take between one regular application and misuse is actually quite easy. So we definitely need to have that ethical layer and the need for jointly producing the necessary regulatory regime, both public governance and also private governance at the level of standards and so on, as we mature these applications. But we need sociological research and not only technical issues like explainability and this and that. We need to understand what the public thinks in order to then correct what can be misperceptions of the capabilities of the technologies today. Because there is also quite a lot of mistrust that is unfounded. And on the other hand, we have a lot of leap of faith, too much faith on what these technologies can achieve. And we all need to be a little bit more pragmatic as to where we are today. And we are not in the superintelligence.
From pragmatic to a topic which you are very much trying to address in your work, which is the context of industrial systems and AI. The relation of the workforce and the people working in that environment and AI. And we heard at the beginning of the week from Jana Köhler that there might be problems if the data is flawed or not sufficient enough in sort of that relationship that could be either led to misperceptions or also to malfunctions. So data and the quality of data and who is in control of the data and how it is fed into the system is a very important and a very fundamental one. Is that right? Does that need a better balance, a better control?
Absolutely. I mean, issues of data quality and understanding the limitations of existing data sets for a particular application is the point of departure. As you may remember, the circular set of characteristics that I presented, data quality is number one. But then on the other hand, I think it's also important to distinguish that we have quite a lot of existing unfair and unbalanced data sets, and that is less known. And yet at the same time, the world has huge, enormous amounts of data that we really don't know how to handle them. So it's balancing both. But data quality is key, but so is model training to understand how to use the data.
You were talking about all the time, or we were talking all the time about the interaction, which certainly plays an important role in the future. But also there are expectations to what AI can do or what it shouldn't do. So how to meet best the expectations of the end users? Does that mean there is a continuous need for a dialogue between tech, end users, and sort of the ones in control of the whole system?
I think that in order to have this dialogue to be meaningful, and going back to talking about training, we also need, we need to train the software developers and the ML experts and AI experts on understanding the wider world, right? But also we need to be pragmatic in that we cannot demand from one single person to have, let's say, very narrow, high-level technical capabilities and at the same time being a trained ethicist. So we need a combination of things to happen in order to have that chain of information to prevent the misuse. So I don't think there is one easy solution to that, except the awareness that we need to train those who create the systems, but the creation of the systems need to be populated by teams of different capabilities. So you need interdisciplinarity from an academic perspective. You need interdisciplinarity to be extremely present. You need teams that have people with different insights that can see the sort of robustness at the technical level, the problems with the data, and then you will need somebody who is much more aware of the user interface. This is quite common in software development, the user experience. But here, I think we need to go 2 steps further into that user experience, in the sense that we need to create a feedback loop into what didn't work, and also how it was misused and misinterpreted.
But Azun, let me put it a little bit in another way. It's not only about misuse, it's also about non-use at all. Let me put it that way. Sometimes one could have the impression that tech is producing applications, offerings, and sort of things, trying to address things which they think are meeting the expectations of the consumer or the people. And the people stands in front of it and says, I don't know either how to handle it, or if I really need it, or if that is really meeting my standards or what I need to know. And so far, there can be miscommunication. And can that be changed?
Yeah, I think I understand what you are saying now, but I'm not sure it's only miscommunication, because I think this push for putting things in the market is because a lot of the big push on these technologies comes from a handful of companies that are competing with each other in the market to put out things without really seeing, is this good? Is it needed by society? So maybe I'm not saying that. So I will question: do we really need this? I think it boils down to a one-directional push. Again, a handful of companies dominating this, the creation and maturity of these technologies, to put to use that things that may not be relevant. Whereas on the other hand, I believe one of the most important opportunities is to do the other way around, not necessarily from the people or the user towards those who create the technologies, but understanding to what are the key societal issues that artificial intelligence can help us solving, that until now we may have not been able to solve. So you can have the example of an interesting debate happening in the field of climate change today, right? So it's getting at that level, I think, what is important. Until now, most of the things we see are related to, again, handful of companies putting things in the market, and with the push for consumerism or issues like that, rather than looking into what does the world need? What if we have these wonderful technologies? How can we actually leverage them to solve problems that matter to society and to people?
I'm
not sure I have answered your question.
You just mentioned climate change, which is one of the largest problems we are all facing. And your company has endorsed the statement of sustainability in digital age. It argues that tackling the climate crisis and achieving a broader sustainability goal is indivisible from creating a secure, equitable, and trusted digital world. So here is the precondition which needs to be managed and be there before we can solve the larger problem of climate change. So there's an interdependence. What is the right way to move forward on that issue?
Well, I mean, you are referring to the Montreal Declaration.
Yes.
That we signed together with other people, and I was part of the team that did the research related to this, which is all about a call for making sure that we leverage technologies in general, but very much digital technologies to serve democratic issues. I think this is actually one of the biggest challenges of our generation, together with solving climate change, and perhaps one is dependent on the other, because solving climate change also requires well-functioning democracies. And Shoshana Zuboff, the American author, really that wrote the Surveillance Capitalism. I think she says it very clearly, and I had a wonderful opportunity to actually interview her, and she said it. We need to put digital technologies and definitely intelligent technologies like AI at the service of democracy, rather working against it. And in doing so, we'll create a system where we can confidently elaborate and have the basis for the needed debate on what are the steps to take. In relationship to sustainability, I mean, many climate, for example, many of these topics are heavily data driven, right? If you look at climate information, so it's heavily data driven, and we have the opportunity to get insights from this data that we didn't before. In fact, understanding climate modeling is impossible without the role of supercomputers. It has always been technology mediated. So we have a great opportunity here to do that, but we are not doing enough. The vast majority of the applications that we see, again, to my mind, I think are, they started with teasing consumers, telling you what to buy, selecting your priority, your most, your preferred list of books, what should be the next movie or film that you should be seeing. And I think it's thinking along the lines of how can we use these technologies to tell us something that is much more important than what is our next Netflix show to watch, where the challenge lies. And it requires democratizing. And part of democratizing is also communicating with the public, educating young people, educating policymakers and bureaucrats and everybody as to what are the potential good things and the potential misuse of these technologies, rather than keep pushing them.
So Azon, we talked a lot about current challenges as well as challenges ahead of us. Let me challenge you as a sociologist and philosopher. We always sort of see that moral and ethical questions are sort of either lagging behind the technical developments or not sort of being focused enough and not maybe also not debated enough. So let me ask you about industry. The standards on ethics and fairness in machine learning algorithms, there are some voluntary guidelines in some aspects of industry, and there's also an OECD list of guidelines which is not mandatory. So as a philosopher and sociologist, where are your biggest concerns about deviating two different paths, leaving in different directions?
Well, actually, what I think very interesting, as a philosopher and in my earlier work, when I was in academia, I did quite a lot of work on applied ethics. And the problem was always the same, that the ethical considerations came after, right? So you frame something and then you think about the ethics. But I believe that actually the liveliness of the current debate that we see on artificial intelligence has put the ethical questions quite at the core and quite early on. Again, I'm thinking that we are early on in this journey. So, for example, in terms of industry standards, the International Standards Organization, ISO, has a committee SC42 about AI, and it has many different sets of working groups and touches upon many topics. There is a working group on trustworthy AI, and as part of that, there is a central piece that is in the making on the ethical and societal issues, and it crosscuts to many of the standards that are being done in other parts of this committee. So I'm not saying it's perfect, but what I'm saying is that precisely because it's so scary and the consequences of surveying populations or deploying, automating weapons are so problematic, and also the more sort of existential problem of having machines eventually ruling over the human race is so scary, that this has led to a very lively debate early on in this technology. So I think this is an interesting development. And what is important is that we continue along these lines, that it continues to remain part of the conversation. And I believe it is part of the conversation, and it should remain part of the conversation, because we are never going to end solving the potential ethical issues as we move along and we learn from experience, and the technologies are applied to different areas. They're always going to come new ethical dilemmas, and eventually training the big companies, the big tech companies, they're all concerned about that. Sometimes not sufficiently, but they are, and that it tells you that that the topic is alive, and is alive early on in the maturing and the deploying of the technology.
Azun, one very last question.
Yeah.
Azun, one last question, I think, which also plays a very important role in the processes, or the process you just outlined, is risk management. Use the abilities and also the tools of risk management to get better results. If I ask you a question in this direction, what technologies are sort of needing risk management as far as their quick approach or even their accelerating speech is concerned in the field of AI?
All of them.
All of them. Good answer.
Absolutely. I think, you need to, some of the work we are doing right now is related to assurance of complex and intelligent systems. So even without AI, we have technological capabilities that have led to things that are so complex, very often nobody understands. If you think about the way in which control systems and deployment of software into boats or aeroplanes or cars, this has been coming for a long time. But now we are in making these machines complicated, also because there are systems where you have many different organizations providing different bits and pieces, and complex and intelligent systems do have emergent properties, meaning that the risk becomes an emergent, the safety becomes an emergent property. And therefore, I believe that having clear risk management plans in place is an absolutely sine qua non condition for any of these complex and intelligent systems. More so when, in addition, we add that additional layer of complexity and uncertainty, which is these new technologies who can make decisions on their own, and very often are very difficult to understand to the human mind. Let's don't forget that many of those, I spoke about the 3 types, and perhaps more the last 2 than the first, are often referred to as black box systems. So all of them is my answer. No doubt.
Thank you very much, Azun, because you very well outlined the complexity of the whole issue. Now I come to a very simple thing, a very simple task. Just saying thank you to you, which is simple, but I think it comes from my heart. It was very enlightening, and I think in the interest of all of our people watching us, thank you to you and the Nordic light behind you, which we want to keep as one of the beauties in the world of a safe and secure climate and environment. We want to keep it. We want to thank you. And all of your audience, please come back in 5 minutes, sharp 4:40. Thank you very much. Thank you, Azun.
Thank you.
Welcome again and welcome back. Let me now introduce our next bright star in our series of fireworks throughout this 5-day week of Aspen AI Berlin conference. Let me introduce Isabella Hermann, who will moderate the conversation with Martin Fort and Wendy Hall. Isabella is a political scientist with a specialization on international relations and the questions how discourses on new technologies determine global power structures. Looking into the future is exactly what we wanted to put at the end of this 5-day conference, because we think that this is the right way to end the whole thing. But before that, Isabella, the floor is yours, and please introduce your panel. Thank you for being with us.
Thank you very much for this nice introduction. Welcome everyone also from my side. Great that you have tuned in for the very last and very interesting event of the Aspen AI Week. A 2-on-1 conversation with Dame Wendy Hall and Martin Fort. So welcome the two of you. As for the procedure, the three of us will now have a conversation, a talk for around 35 minutes or so. And after that, I try to have 2 or 3 questions from you, the virtual audience. So just pose your questions in the Q&A section in the Zoom conference. So time is short, so better get started. First, I'd like to introduce Martin Fort, a futurist and entrepreneur. And he's quite renowned for his New York Times best-selling book, Rise of the Robots, Technology and the Threat of a Jobless Future. And also a very warm welcome to Dame Wendy Hall, Regius Professor of Computer Science at the University of Southampton, and one of the 2 authors of the influential independent UK government report, Growing the Artificial Intelligence Industry in the UK from 2017. So I'd like to start with you, Wendy. One of the major ideas of the report was the creation or the establishment of data trusts. So could you please elaborate a bit on the idea and tell us why they matter and where we are at right now when it comes to data trusts?
Thank you very much, and thank you for inviting me to be here today. Well, the first thing to say is that I've said this quite often in public. When we were doing the report, Jerome and I, we had to decide on the recommendations and the order they came in. And we were working with the politicians, the civil servants at number 10, who were helping us frame it in a way that the politicians would be keen to sign off on. And they wanted us to put skills first, which of course would have made a lot of sense. But we actually, from the soundings we took from businesses large and small, we had decided that what we were hearing back was one of the biggest issues was how people share data in order to develop new AI systems. The small companies were talking about the fact that it's not a level playing field and that it's very difficult for small companies, even if they've got the most wonderful algorithm, to get access to the data they need to train it. And of course, this was one of the reasons why DeepMind, which grew out of the UK and has been doing some amazing work, turned to Google for investment. And also large companies, it was a question of, well, if we're going to share our data, under what terms and conditions do we do that? And then you've got the issue, of course, that some of that data, in fact, probably the majority of it, cannot be open data. It will be either commercially confidential, or it will be personal data, data that needs to be kept very secure. There's all sorts of reasons why you can't just throw it out there. So we felt that this was one of the biggest issues, and we had to tackle going forward. And so we put that as our first recommendation, that the UK should invest in developing rules and regulations and processes and the guidelines and help for industry and the public sector to set up what we call data trust. Now, in fact, they're called all sorts of things now. In the UK, we have something called trust law, and some people argue that data trusts have to be set up under trust law, which is quite a specialized law. That might work for some instances. Generally, it's going to be contract law that you shape in a way that works for the data trust or institution or whatever you call it. It's going to be set up. I shouldn't talk for too long because there's a whole story here, but whilst there was a lot of agreement that this was something we should do, we didn't put, I don't think, enough money into developing those. It was sort of assumed they would bubble up. Well, if they didn't for a while, but during COVID they really have, and I assume that's happening around the world. During the last year, people have suddenly the idea that you need to share data to actually achieve the analysis you want to achieve across data sets that are owned by different organizations and have very different terms and conditions and formats and everything else has become so acute during the pandemic. To try and help us analyze what's going on. But in the UK, certainly, we've seen a number of initiatives bubbling up from grassroots to set up these types of sharing agreements. And you're going to see a number of reports coming out in the new year. I'm sure the EU are going to do something about it. I've seen reports from India, very interesting ones about how they're handling this. And certainly in the UK, we have a new national data strategy emerging, and there will be other reports about this type of thing coming out about, and the issue is around the balance between what government has to regulate, what companies and data owners will do themselves, and how they're going to be implemented and how they're going to be used. And I see it as a very exciting time for this type of work, and it will really help drive the AI industry forward.
Thank you. So in fact, you have already answered my next question, if COVID-19 has accelerated the process. But just another question and add on. So in your report, you were quite positive about job creation and the future of employment. So could you just briefly describe where you see the biggest chances also in relation to data trusts, that we understand a bit more what the linkage is between job creation and data trusts?
Well, it's a little hard, and maybe someone like Martin is better versed in doing this sort of thing, but we are talking about jobs we don't have names for yet, and we don't know what they're going to be. I always give the example, my father, who was born in 1919, was an accountant, and he spent his entire career, actually he would probably just call himself a clerk, but he was an accountant. He managed the company's books, and they were that books, and everything they did was pen and paper, and he divided pounds, shillings and pence. Remember those? He divided pounds, shillings and pence by pounds, shillings and pence, either in his head or on paper. He could add up a sum. Anyway, they did everything. And of course they had to copy everything. There were ledgers where we get the terms from, everything. And of course, all those jobs have gone, right? Nobody has, none of those jobs exist today. But the finance industry employs more people than it ever did. And what the use of computers, of course, calculators first and then computers, you take the drudge out of the job so that it frees us to do more creative things that the computers help us to do, and you get this sort of circle of growth where, and sometimes it goes wrong because sometimes the computers enable us to do things we don't understand, and partly that's what caused the financial crash in 2008. But this circle of growth whereby you have new ideas, computers help you to achieve a new type of investment or a new type of analysis of company or whatever, and the whole sector grows. Now, in terms of data trust, we absolutely are going to need people, because of the issues around in AI in terms of the ethics of AI, and we've got to worry about bias in algorithms and in data, and how we make sure that the right answers are emerging for whatever the target their clients are, and all the how we verify, validate this industry, regulate this industry. There are jobs around all of that, and just things, data auditing, data quality control, all these types of jobs will emerge. There's a lot of work for lawyers as well, I should say, in all this. So it's another growth area. Yes, there are going to be far more jobs now in this type of sector than we could even conceive of today. Of course, there are people that will lose their jobs to automation, and there is, history tells us there will be short-term losers. And that's what governments have to manage, is people who lose their jobs to automation and don't have the skills or the ability to retrain or find other work. But
Yeah.
and of course, when we did the report in 2017, we weren't expecting a pandemic to hit 3 years later, which has distorted everything again, of course. But it's increased the demise of some industries and will increase the rise of others, which is very interesting.
So thank you. I mean, this, of course, now leads me to Martin Ford. I mean, since the byline of your book is Threat of a Jobless Future, I might guess you have a different take on the future of work. So how do you see it, the future of employment and job creation?
Yeah, I'm generally characterized as being obviously a bit more pessimistic on that. Which is not to say that I disagree with what Wendy said. I mean, I think absolutely that new jobs will be created as a result of these advances. But I also think a lot of jobs will be destroyed. And there are two questions there. One is, overall, is the job creation going to be sufficient to counteract that job destruction? And the second question is really, what about specific groups of people? And I worry about both of those, especially in the long run. Once we get out, beyond 10 years, I think that the impact of this could be truly dramatic, could be such that really we see a lot more destruction than we see creation. And in particular, as Wendy said, there are going to be people that benefit from this in the sense that their jobs become less dull, less boring, and artificial intelligence enables them to be more creative. But of course, those tend to be the people that are already kind of at the top of the pyramid in terms of the kind of cognitive work that they're doing, right? They're people that are going to tend to be fairly well educated, maybe extremely well, and people that are already doing things that are generally non-routine, more intellectual, that type of work. But there's a whole group of other people that come to work and they do things that for the most part are fundamentally routine and repetitive. And by that, I don't necessarily mean doing exactly the same thing again, like standing on an assembly line in a factory, but they tend to face the same types of challenges. And what that means is that a lot of what they do is going to be susceptible to machine learning. There's going to be data that essentially encapsulates what they're doing, and eventually there'll be algorithms that will be able to churn through that data and figure out what they're doing, and more of those jobs are going to fall to automation. And that might be white-collar work, clerical type work, things like bookkeeping, accounting, things like that. We're already seeing a big impact. Or of course, it's also factory work. It's work in warehouses where robots are getting better and better and better. So I think eventually we reach a point where there's some significant subset of people that really are best equipped to do fairly routine things, and routine work in general is just kind of evaporate, and some of those people will successfully transition to other areas, but I think a lot of them will struggle. We're going to have to come up with a solution to that, and I'm a bit skeptical that the solution is the traditional things that we've done in the past, like job retraining and reskilling and more education, things like this. And then the reason is, at least if you look in the United States, these kinds of programs don't have a very good track record. I mean, back when globalization was the problem, when the factories started to close in the Rust Belt, the industrial Midwest in the United States, there were job retraining programs, and the track record of those in terms of what they were actually able to do for the people that were impacted were really not very good. So I think that we're going to have to sort of reconsider the tools in our toolbox in order to adapt to all of this. And that's one reason that I've been an advocate eventually of having something like a universal basic income, just to supplement everyone's income and make sure that everyone meets some kind of minimum threshold so that people can have a decent life. And I think eventually that's going to become pretty much essential for most countries.
Winnie, did you directly wanted to answer, or you have to unmute yourself, I guess?
Oh, I thought you'd muted me. Anyway, so I wanted to just echo what Martin said. I totally agree with that, and I think we need, and actually we have seen it in COVID as well, the need for it. Because so many people are losing their jobs. I'm sure it's the same in the US because of COVID, not just because of automation, because they're, the sorts of jobs they did, the industries they did are just dying and may or may not come back again. The need for some sort of to value people who may not have the white collar knowledge skills to do the sort of high end jobs that we're talking about here, but are hugely important to the community. And we've seen how we need people to help in the community, to help people who can't help themselves. And we need to value that. And it will, and so I'm more and more convinced, although I'm not an economist, that the idea of a universal basic income is the way we should be going, instead of the sort of you have a job or you have unemployment pay. I think this idea of a universal basic income, so everyone feels valued, but we encourage people to support the community generally. And you could argue, I mean, some cities, we already have it, I think, in the city, I believe it's Bristol in the UK, has a sort of a barter system whereby they barter skills to help in the community. And, there's so many, and you think about the care for the elderly or the disabled or people with learning difficulties or all the issues that we have where those skills are hugely needed so that people can have a quality of life. And I think this is a chance, and the pandemic has just fueled this idea that we could really think about a different social contract.
So I'm just having a question coming in from the audience. But actually I think it's quite interesting as well. So how likely do you think is the introduction of a universal basic income? So how, I mean, actually to both of you, I mean,
to Martin.
Yeah, actually to Martin then. So how can we reach that? How can we achieve that?
I've always thought that it would probably take some time, and I think history shows that for us to do something that admittedly radical relative to what we've done before, we need to have a crisis. That these things don't tend to happen because of smooth planning. I mean, if you look back at the Great Depression, that's what caused the United States to basically have things like Social Security and unemployment insurance for the first time. It took that massive crisis for that to happen. And I've always thought that, the same is probably going to be true for basic income. So probably things will have to get worse before they get better. I would say that in the last few years, it's definitely, I've become more optimistic. In part, that's because of COVID. You do see programs that in many places begin to look a little bit like a basic income. The United States, we actually sent out, so-called stimulus checks, $1,200 to everyone, which is, something that begins to look like a basic income, right? If you start doing that on a monthly basis. The other thing that happened in the U.S. was the Democratic presidential candidate Andrew Yang, right, who ran and got a lot of attention and built a huge following on this theme of actually having what he called a freedom dividend, basically a basic income for citizens, which is something that happened a lot sooner than I would have expected to see it in the U.S. So this is now something that is kind of on the radar. People are aware of it in a way that I think that they weren't previously, but still I suspect it's going to be a while before a program like this is really adopted. And I think the place to start is probably with smaller pilot programs to test it with different parameters so we can learn more about how it might actually work before we actually implemented on national scales.
Thanks. Yeah, so I mean, let's hope if COVID-19 does any good, that it enables new ways of thinking in new directions. I have another question actually to the two of you regarding automation. Because I have the feeling that AI, so be it a robot or a software, is really marketed as working perfectly. You know, like there's a smooth automation, we don't need any human intervention and interaction. And then I read about companies who employ millions of people just to check for the big internet companies if their AI does actually what it should do. For example, when it comes to search engines, I mean, there are millions of people just checking manually if it works and improve the algorithms. So is it really a myth that we are on a way to this smooth, perfect techno world, or will we always need humans who have an oversight or evaluate if the machines are actually doing what we want them to do? Who wants to start?
I guess I can start. It certainly isn't perfect, but it is clearly getting better. And it will get dramatically better, I think, over the next decade. But it's true, there are always, I think, at least for the foreseeable future, there will always be a place for people in the process. But there are two questions: how many people, and what kinds of jobs, are they going to be? And you mentioned all these people that are working with search engines and things like that. Like, for example, you've got people that moderate content, right? You've got people that work for companies like Twitter looking for pornographic images and things like that work in the Philippines, very low wage workers. And, yes, they are jobs, but they are very, in a sense, dehumanizing jobs, right? I mean, and this is kind of what we're seeing, is that in many environments, as automation and AI gets better, the machines take over most of it, but then there are certain things that can't be done yet because the technology isn't advanced enough yet. And so humans kind of step into that role, but they almost are being used almost like a neural net that is plugged into the system to do something that an artificial neural network can't do. So you use a human neural network to do it, right? So that is not necessarily the kind of job that most people dream of. It tends to be very rote, repetitive, and kind of dehumanizing. So that's another problem. So it's getting more and more proficient, and it's going to have a bigger and bigger impact over time.
So, Wendy, what's your take on this?
Well, I'm not as pessimistic as Martin, partly because I want to see, I talk about we need to keep the human in the loop. And certainly at the moment we do, because the systems are by no means perfect. But, and the issues of bias and ensuring that the decisions that are made are checked, and there are checks and balances about making sure the systems are behaving as they should, and that in itself needs to be interpreted. And I think that we are going to see a proliferation of AI regulation coming out across the world generally. I draw the analogy with the way that we have financial regulation. Every company has to declare its, across the world largely, it may have started in the UK, but every company has to declare its accounts at the end of the year, show that they haven't done anything corrupt or illegal, and they have to be audited by a third-party company to prove the directors are behaving properly. This system has emerged over many centuries, actually, but certainly in the last decades, to quite a big industry in itself. And I think we're going to see that it'll be the same but different with AI. I think companies that use AI, and that in itself is not, some companies claim they're using AI. What is AI? And other companies use AI but don't tell you. But, so this is not clear cut, but generally we're going to have some sort of regulation where companies who use AI systems are audited in some way, and that will, and again, create a whole new industry. And that auditing could could mean testing the output of the AI algorithms against some benchmark that the company may set up. This is what we say our algorithm does. Here's some test runs to prove it does what it does, and to prove it's not biased and doesn't, choose the wrong people or tell people they've got an illness when they haven't, and vice versa. And so important in things like self-driving cars and this sort of regulation. We don't want to over-regulate because we want to stimulate innovation, we want to allow innovation, but on the other hand, we want checks and balances to make sure that people are not being hurt or abused or whatever, discriminated against by the systems. So this will create an industry of its own. We have to get the balance right between government regulation and what companies do themselves, and what citizens' rights are in all this. And we've seen the rise of the tech companies, the datagopolis, who have done so far not had any regulation at all really about what they do, and that's just coming to the fore now, as that's a big challenge for society as to how we handle that, how different governments handle that. There are lots of employment prospects in all this. And I would also say something like taking the health sector, where it's generally admitted that in the health sector, the use of AI is going to create efficiencies. Because if you're scanning, say, if you're trying to detect a cancerous tumor in lots of scans, AI can do that. It has been shown more efficiently, more accurately than a human being. But I would argue very much that at the moment, well, firstly, that means that the human being doesn't have that boring job to do, so they can do something to do with patients, or they can, there's something that AI can't do in terms of handling the human beings and the patients themselves, But also, I think it's really important that at the moment, because these systems are not perfect, we absolutely need the human in the loop to check that the results are accurate and that people are not being given the wrong results and told the wrong, there's got to be human checks in there. So I think I'm arguing both that we need the human in the loop at the moment, and that this in itself will lead to a whole new industry in terms of what I explain. So we talk about explainable AI. We have a major issue going forward, and the deep learning algorithms. It is really they cannot explain how they make their decisions. It's really difficult. So we're spawning a whole industry that's trying to understand what the decisions a deep learning system makes, or maybe detect a deep fake. And my worry about that is that it's a holy grail that we'll never be able to reach, because it's just a cat and mouse game. But this will again spawn a whole new industry. Whether all these the dehumanization, it's interesting, it's all relative. I think about kids going up chimneys in the Victorian days, and I think about the fights we had when I was a student with the coal miners going on strike because they wanted the right to go down into a coal mine. And you sort of think about it now, 50 years on, and you think, why would you fight for people to work underground in those dreadful, very dangerous conditions when machines can do it much better? So I think it's all relative.
So now you touched upon many, many important topics. Maybe let's go back to the health sector. So Tom Ford, question to you. Do you in fact think that doctors could spend more time with patients if we have more artificial intelligence software like doing diagnosis or whatever? Or do you actually think that the system will just become faster and faster and put more pressure on the doctors?
That was for me?
Yeah, that was for you.
Oh, sorry. I don't worry too much about doctors. Again, doctors are extremely skilled workers, right? They have enormous amounts of education. So it's true, if you have an algorithm that can read cancer scans or x-rays, then a radiologist maybe will work more with patients or oversee the process. I think it will be a long time before doctors are completely out of the loop. I mean, as Wendy said, we do need people to check these results and so forth. But again, these are very high skilled jobs, and the people that I worry most about are not people in medicine, but maybe people working at McDonald's, right? I mean, or people doing lower end clerical work and so forth. I do think there's a lot of opportunity in healthcare. You already see robots being deployed in hospitals and things like that. So there could be an impact there. But that's really, rather than something that I would worry about, it's more of a massive opportunity because we really do need to rein in health costs and so forth.
Yes.
What I worry about are really other kinds of workers, which are going to be predominantly in other industries, and taking one of those people that loses a job in those industries and then training them to necessarily do the kind of thing that Wendy was just talking about, having them check AI or audit AI and things like that, simply may not be realistic. So I do worry about potentially quite a large fraction of our workforce being.
No, when I'm old and can't do it myself, I want them to come and do my garden for me, right? I can't, and I want that, and I want them to, I want them to help in a way that is valued, right? And I think there's all sorts of jobs, community type roles that we can, if we go the route of a universal basic income, we could. That supports and is compassionate within a community, that it's not about having to retrain into an AI job if people aren't able to do that. I think there's plenty of work that needs to be done that we don't find ways to get done at the moment, and a lot of that is to do with caring for people and helping people who can't help themselves.
So then what would you suggest? How should we change the educational system? What improvements could we do?
No, that's different. Now you're talking about something different. I mean, we're here talking about people who lose their jobs and can't retrain to a new type of job. And I think it's really important to, as with all, as you have a revolution, you need to make sure that in an industrial revolution of some sort, you need to make sure that the children coming in are well educated to be able to do the new types of jobs.
Yeah, but then actually the question was more directed to Tom Ford, because if there are not enough new jobs, actually, so how would we educate the young people? So what changes needs to be done in the educational system?
Well, I mean, the best advice you can give is don't educate people to do, fundamentally routine jobs, or to come to work and do the same kind of thing again and again, which means emphasizing things like creativity, the ability to work with other people. These are the things that are hard to automate, right? At least for the time being. Maybe eventually even that will be automated, but coming up with genuinely new ideas, thinking outside the box, building something entirely new. These are things that people are good at, and right now machines are not good at. And the other thing is really working with people, building relationships, having empathy for another person, building, very sophisticated interpersonal connections. These are things that people are uniquely good at, and someday machines may compete there too, but not yet. So these are probably the areas where we want to make particularly sure our education system is focused on. But again, that isn't necessarily a universal solution. Some people are going to have innate personality traits and talents that are going to make them better at those kinds of things. I mean, I've mentioned creativity. Is creativity something that you can teach, or is that an innate quality you either have or you don't have? It's kind of unclear, right? But we can do what we can in our education system. And even setting this stuff aside, it's got huge problems just getting people at basic standards of being able to read and write. Many schools in the United States. So, I mean, there's a huge challenge there ahead of us, right? I mean, if you really are not even at the point where you're literate, then as our society becomes more and more complex and more technological, and there are even fewer of the kinds of jobs that might be appropriate for that kind of person, then it's going to get harder and harder. So, yeah, education is a huge challenge that I think no one really has all the answers to at all.
But I see also some agreement between the two of you on that side as well when it comes to education.
Well, you see, I'd agree totally with Martin, and I think things like, and we do, some schools will do this today, where you take, you get kids out into the community and show them what it means to help in the community. Take them to old folks' homes, whatever you call them these days, or to help with elderly people who, every generation will have their elderly generation that can't use the new gadgets, whatever those new gadgets are. As you get older, you find it much harder to adapt to the new technologies. And, as our homes become more and more driven by technology, when things break, people who are, I know as I get older, I'm more concerned about this, right? As my arthritis grows in my hands and I need someone to help me do simple things. And the same with learning new technologies. I mean, I'm still fine about learning new technologies, but the generation above me isn't, right? They can't use smartphones very easily. It's really hard. My mother was 96. She was a very bright woman, but she really found it hard to get her head around a mobile phone, a simple one. And then when things go wrong, you need someone to fix it. And you need that to be in a safe way and not, and so I think there's all sorts of, there's also the other end of the scale is helping people with young children. And I think if we get kids out into the community as part of their education, to learn the sorts of skills Martin's talking about. And even if you've got someone who's a bit on the autistic spectrum, they can still go into an elderly person's home and help them fix something, right? You can still make that happen. So I think that we need to be creative about the way we do this, and that education should stop being just people sitting in classrooms at desks listening to the teacher.
Yeah, actually, thanks. I wanted to touch upon another topic, because then Wendy, you before mentioned also biases when we were talking about this perfect techno world. And this leads me actually to a follow-up question, because you were recently appointed to the new Commission on AI Governance and Public Policy, and from the Oxford University.
Oh, yes.
And I think there are many scandals around in the world when it comes to the application of AI in public policy. And I just instantly remember this summer when there was an algorithm used to generate the exams or the grades of students, and then it was unfairly biased. And how do you see your role in this commission when it comes to public policy? Because before we were talking also about companies and about regulation for companies, but what is it when it comes to the public, to the state?
It isn't just, I mean, my role in the commission is what the people at the OAI are running the commission. I'm just effectively as a commissioner, I'm an advisor, right, to them. So I let them, but I think that generally, I mean, I've got things all over my desk here of AI ethics frameworks that are beginning to emerge, and how to stop it, again, the checks and balances about checking whether an algorithm works or not. And that one about the prediction of A-level grades that we had in the UK this summer, which was an absolute disaster. It wasn't even really AI, but it was a decision-making system. And it went horribly wrong, but it wasn't because the algorithm was wrong. The algorithm did what it was designed to do, but it was designed badly, with not thought through the consequences, and it was tested on the wrong data. It was tested on the previous year's, I can't remember, it should have been tested on predicted grades for the previous year, and it was tested on the final grades. And so that this is an example of how not to do it. It's a classic example of how not to do it. It ruined a few people's lives along the way. And these are the lessons we need to learn. And there's a lot of work to be done in public sector in helping the civil servants get up to speed with what they've got to do in terms of checking whether an algorithm is fit for purpose, or whether it's been going to have unexpected consequences, not just be biased.
And you were talking about checks and balances. And we have another question from the audience, from Antonia Berg. And she actually lifts it a level higher. She asks, can a system of checks and balances work with so many actors worldwide? So now we're not only talking about national governments, but how could we work on that? Maybe to Martin, do you have?
It's a hard question.
Yeah, I mean,
hard audience, yeah.
Yeah, I do think that regulating artificial intelligence is going to be a huge challenge, even at the national level, let alone at the international level. I mean, obviously, one of the dynamics there is that there's very definite competition between U.S. and Western countries and China, for example, right? And this is something that is going to have a very big impact in many ways in the future, and going right to national security. And artificial intelligence is everywhere. It's going to impact everything. It's going to have obviously military applications. So, we worry about autonomous weapons, things like this, really scary things, as well as issues around bias and fairness and the potential for deep fakes that could you can imagine fake videos that could, you've seen the impact of viral videos, in the United States in terms of the unrest and things that can happen. You can imagine some nefarious player creating fake videos of very high fidelity that are intended to cause explosive unrest or something. So there are huge issues there that we're going to have to deal with. This is one of the most important things for sure, and there's no easy answer to it. I think that we're going to have to. One thing I advocate for is a specific agency. Something like the FDA regulates drugs. We may need a specific agency at the national level to regulate artificial intelligence, and maybe every country will have that, and maybe they'll all coordinate, and there'll be an international scheme or something. But that we're going to need something, I think, on that sort of a level.
Because I'm looking at AI on the time, I totally agree with Martin on that. There is something called the Global Partnership in AI that's emerging, which is being led by Canada and France. And most of the Western democracies and others are signed up. But China's not part of that. And I think that's a real issue, because China is a major. I've been writing about this recently. China is very becoming quite dominant, and it's 20% or more of the world's population. And it actually, you may not agree with the way the government, the way the government works in China, but it is dominating a significant chunk of the world. It's bringing the internet and AI into Africa, and a lot of Southeast Asia is dependent on China. And so I think ignoring China, we have to work with them in this type of regulation. We have to work out what we can agree on and where we differ, and some because we're going to be trading in these types of systems. So I don't think you can afford to duck that conversation. But otherwise, I agree with Martin about this. We have to think of it at a global level. Yeah.
I think this also kind of answers another question from the audience, from Catherine McGovern, who asked how we could counteract the negative and even fearful attitude of the public towards AI, probably with agreements and regulation, then, if I understood you right. So we are really running towards the end of the conversation. So I wanted to ask you to end with a question and ask for a short answer maybe. What do you think is more important or more relevant, or what would you put first? Data ethics or AI ethics?
Well, I would say you can't choose. You absolutely cannot separate them, because today, it wasn't true earlier. When I started, AI came out of philosophy, but today AI really means machine learning, and in the future it will mean something else. But today it means machine learning, and machine learning, deep learning, neural net, it's all based about training on data. And you have to know about the data, the quality of that data, and the management of it. And so I don't think you can distinguish between the two. I think they have to be considered together, is my view.
Martin, you have any comment on that?
Well, I certainly agree with that. Yes, the smartest algorithm isn't worth anything without the data that it's trained on. So those two things go together. But I would just say that this is a huge issue, whether you want to call it ethics or whether you want to just call it inclusiveness. The key idea here is that we want to make sure that artificial intelligence is a positive force for humanity, and we want to make sure that everyone benefits. So we want to make sure that it's not used in nefarious ways to harm people, to make us worse off, and we want to make sure that that's true of everyone, and it's not biased against certain groups or economically certain groups are left behind.
So thank you for this closing remarks, actually. Thank you, the both of you, Wendy Hall and Martin Ford, for this very insightful and interesting conversation. And yeah, have a nice evening. And I give back to Mr. Lenz.
Isabella, thank you very much for moderating this very interesting final stretch to the final finishing line of our 5-day conference. And I'm very pleased with the audience. I mean, you stayed with us through 5 days. It was a long stretch. But I hope that we not only could entertain you, but also attract you, not only by the speakers, but also by the topics. And let me say, it was not only a stress test for all the ones involved, it was also an experiment, because it was a very complex and highly technical issues. And let's look back to the 5 days and some impressions which I would like to share with you. Where are they? I think we are still working on the impressions, but you still can see our speakers from the last session. And I think if Technic is involved, they're loading it up. And hopefully we see some live pictures in a sec. Martin, you are still watching us, so maybe you're one of the live pictures which we still have. And now I think we are coming close to sharing with you some of the impressions of the last 5 days. Let me say what we did. We looked at the impact of COVID-19. We looked at different sectors and professions. We looked at the German EU presidency. We looked at speakers from Europe, the US and beyond, citizens, policymakers, security experts, innovators, economists, philosophers, union organizers. We had them all. And the leitmotif from this week, full of panels, presentations and conversations, was a rather positive one. It was one showing us that we, the public, you, are shaping the future of AI. And it is all also about embedded values which are close and dear to our hearts. This is what is important: the diversity, fairness, trustworthiness in AI, and promote a healthy AI tech and political ecosystem. That was what we had in mind, and I hope that we at least achieved some of it. And now, ladies and gentlemen, let me again thank our major partners which made this extraordinary event possible. First and foremost, the Heinz und Heide Dürr Stiftung, the Baden-Württemberg Landesvertretung, state representation in Berlin, who made it possible to build a full-fledged studio on their premises, which you have seen throughout our short impression slides. There's also to thank the Google, Dell, Microsoft, Friedrich Naumann Foundation, our media partners Tagesspiegel, DNVGL, as well as Internationale Politik and Internationale Politik Quarterly. And now you might ask yourself, what are we doing next? Yes, we already are planning ahead for 2021. Maybe our next topic will be humanity empowered, building resilience of AI and with AI. As countries worldwide trying to recover from the COVID-19 pandemic, we are all challenged with the question how to put more resilience in our societies, in politics, and the economy. And AI might be one of the most important answers. So please stay tuned, because next year will come, and next year Aspen will be back with another conference. But now, ladies and gentlemen, let me say a couple of personal words. I had the honor and the pleasure to serve the Aspen Institutes for 7 years at the helm, and it is now my swan song. But having been the director of the Aspen Institute was pleasure, because I had a team which was so dedicated to its task, and you all see them now on the screen: Olivia, Tobias from our digital department, And then there is Monica, there is Wiebke, Laura. This is a black screen. They are not all looking that way. I think we are still looking for the team. Where is the team? Maybe here they are. You see my team. And they will be serving my successor, who will be a person you all have already met on Monday. It is Stormy Annika Mildner, who will certainly lead this team into new directions and into new goals and objectives. And she, as well as the team, will work closely together to serve you and bring you up to new frontiers and new solutions. Here is Stormy. You have seen her on Monday, and I'm very proud to hand over the baton to her. And this is a surprise because people are now surrounding me. This is the head of our board, Eckhard von Kleden, chairman of the board.
Weaponed with roses.
With weapons and roses. And this is Roland Hoffmann-Theiner, the chairman of the Friends of Aspen, Germany. I'm totally surprised, and I think now they have to do the work and to talk. Please, go on. Who is first?
Lieber Rüdiger, du hast darauf hingewiesen, was für ein fantastisches Team dich unterstützt hat. Aber dieses Team würde es nicht geben ohne deine Führung. Du hast Aspen in den letzten 7 Jahren zu dem gemacht, was es heute ist. Du hast es wieder an die Spitze geführt der transatlantischen Organisation. Du hast das getan mit Zeit, mit Engagement, mit Intelligenz, mit Herzblut, mit Menschlichkeit, mit Umsicht, mit Freundschaft. Die Liste wäre sehr, sehr lang und gäbe es nicht Covid, würden wir dir alle einen Kuss geben. Aber die Pandemie bewahrt dich davor. Wir werden im nächsten Jahr, wenn die Pandemie hinter uns ist, auch noch die Gelegenheit nutzen, dir sehr, sehr herzlich in angemessener Weise dafür zu danken. Aber wir beide, Roland und ich, wollen das heute in dieser Audience tun. Ganz, ganz herzlichen Dank. Du hast dich um Aspen verdient gemacht. Du hast dich um die transatlantischen Beziehungen verdient gemacht. Du hast etwas geleistet, das mir jetzt schwerfällt, in Worte zu fassen. Und jeder, der weiß, was ich für eine Labertasche bin, der kann das ermessen. Rudi, ganz, ganz herzlichen Dank. Mit dem gehörigen Abstand.
I feel honored. I think this is the first time in my life that I get red roses. And they will be for my beloved wife, Petra, who owes a great part of my success, my team's success, and the success of Aspen. This is not saying there's always a strong woman behind a man. She is just lovely, and she knows how to treat me, and maybe I learned a lot from her how to treat other people. Thank you so much. Vielen Dank, lieber Eckhard. I'm overwhelmed, not speechless. That's not the way I work, but thank you so much.
Rüdiger, ich spreche auch auf Deutsch dich an, weil ich für die Freunde, die deutschen Freunde spreche und möchte mich dem Dank von Eckhard im Besonderen anschließen. Du bist vor 7 Jahren ob deiner reifen Berufserfahrung als Übergangskandidat geholt worden. Und nach kurzer Zeit hat man festgestellt, was es wirklich heißt, was in dir steckt. Und du bist in gewisser Weise die Personalisierung des Gedankens von Renaissance oder Revitalisierung. Denn du hast in der Tat Aspen revitalisiert. Du hast ein Team zusammengefügt, was es vorher in der Form nicht gegeben hat. Du hast immer geführt mit großem Engagement und verbunden mit Werten. Und da stehst du in der besten Aspen-Tradition, die man sich nur vorstellen kann. Du hast Werte in eine Diskussion, in eine Zeit gebracht, die manchmal geprägt war von Irrationalismen. Und du personifiziertest auch insofern immer den Gedanken, wir müssen Rationalität in unsere Diskussion hineinbringen, Werte in die Diskussion hineinbringen. Und insofern hast du die Aspen-Fackel im besten Sinne in den letzten Jahren hier in Berlin und weit über Berlin hinaus in die Welt getragen. Wenn wir zurückblicken, hat es einige starke Direktoren gegeben, aber ich glaube, man wird im Rückblick sagen müssen, es gab Shepard Stone und es gab Rüdiger Lenz. In diesem Sinne hast du und hinterlässt du ganz große Fußstapfen, so wie Shepard Stones einstmals große Fußstapfen hinterlassen hat. Stormy wird mit unserer Hilfe diese Fußstapfen zu füllen versuchen und wir sind sehr zuversichtlich, dass ihr das gelingen wird. Und gleichwohl, du hast einen riesen Anteil an dieser Revitalisierung. Und ich wollte jetzt nicht einen weiteren Strauß Rosen dir schenken, sondern etwas Männlicheres, nämlich Bourbon. Was steht am besten sozusagen für transatlantische Exportartikel, insbesondere in Richtung Osten sozusagen? Das ist Bourbon. Und dieser Bourbon hat auch einen wunderschönen Namen, nämlich Heaven's Door. Heaven's Door bedeutet nicht...
Not yet there.
Ja, aber nach einer halben Flasche könnte man sozusagen schon dort anklopfen. Die letzten 4 Jahre transatlantische Beziehungen waren so, dass man manchmal geneigt war, am Abend eine halbe Flasche davon trinken zu wollen. Ich glaube und hoffe, dass in den nächsten Jahren du viel sozusagen mehr daran nippen musst, weil du vielleicht die Beziehung in einem Lichte siehst, dass du sagst, es lohnt sich, darauf wieder anzustoßen. In diesem Sinne noch einmal vielen Dank für all dein Wirken. Alles Gute in der Zukunft.
Thank you all. And again, I take this as also a gratitude to my team, which I regret that I have to leave them, not forever, but at the end of this year, because it was fun. It was a lot of joy. It was sometimes confrontation, but always a very fruitful dialogue. And I'd like to keep it that way also for my successor, Stormy, who already knows how to treat this team the way it needs and it deserves. So thank you again to my team. Thank you, Roland. Thank you, Eckhart. And I'm not riding in the sunset yet, but I can say what he said about revitalizing Aspen. This is sort of a drug, not the bourbon, which I hold in my hand now. Aspen, if you live for it, for its goals, is sort of an infectious disease, much better than COVID. Thank you so much, and I say goodbye. Wow.